The small wooden crate beneath Theodora Flynn's feet wobbled precariously as she stepped off the stagecoach. Her arrival in Whispering Creek, Wyoming territory, as unremarkable as the dust that clung to her travel-worn skirts. The year was 1876, and like so many women before her, she had traveled across the country with nothing but a letter of agreement and the desperate hope that the man waiting for her would be kind. No one came forward to greet her. Theodora clutched her single battered valise tighter as her eyes scanned the weathered buildings that made up the main street of the frontier town. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dirt road, and the spring air carried the mingled scents of horses, cooking fires, and the faint hint of wildflowers from the surrounding plains. "Miss Flynn," the stagecoach driver's gruff voice startled her. "This is your stop, ain't it? Whispering Creek." "Yes, thank you," Theodora replied softly, her Eastern accent immediately marking her as an outsider. "I was told someone would meet me." The driver shrugged, already busy unloading the other luggage. "Ain't my concern, miss. Town ain't big. You'll find who you're looking for." Theodora squared her shoulders and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in her stomach. 23 years old and nearly 1,000 miles from the Boston orphanage where she'd spent most of her life, she was utterly alone. "Excuse me." She approached a woman sweeping the boardwalk in front of what appeared to be a general store. "I'm looking for Mr. Howard Pemberton. I believe he runs the Mercantile." The woman's eyes widened slightly as she looked Theodora up and down, taking in her plain brown traveling dress, sensible boots, and the unfashionable way her mousy brown hair was pulled back under her bonnet. "You must be the mail-order bride," the woman said, making no effort to hide her surprise. "Howard's inside. Store's closing soon, but you can't miss him." Theodora nodded her thanks and stepped into the Mercantile, the bell above the door announcing her arrival. The shop was well stocked but empty of customers this late in the day. Behind the counter stood a portly man with thinning hair and spectacles, writing in a ledger. "Mr. Pemberton?" Theodora called softly. The man looked up, his expression shifting from shopkeeper's politeness to confusion. "Yes, I'm Theodora Flynn, from Boston." She swallowed hard. "We've been corresponding?" Howard Pemberton's face fell so dramatically that Theodora felt her heart plummet with it. "Miss Flynn? But the photograph you sent was taken 5 years ago?" she admitted, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "It was the only one I had." He came around the counter, still staring. "You seemed different in your letters." "The sisters at the orphanage helped me write them," Theodora confessed. "It was better to be honest from the start. I can read and write, but they thought my handwriting wasn't fine enough." Howard Pemberton removed his spectacles and pinched the bridge of his nose. "This won't do at all. I specifically requested someone with more refinement. Someone who would help elevate my standing in the community." Theodora stood frozen, clutching her valise so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I understand if you're disappointed, Mr. Pemberton, but I've come all this way. Perhaps if we talked—" "There's nothing to discuss." His voice was cold. "The agreement is void. You're not what was promised." The bell over the door jingled again, and Theodora turned to see an elegantly dressed woman enter the store. She was perhaps 30, with golden hair arranged fashionably beneath a feathered hat. "Howard, dear, I was hoping you might have those ribbons I ordered." The woman stopped short when she saw Theodora. "Oh, is this your mail-order bride?" Her voice carried a note of incredulity that made Theodora wince. "A misunderstanding, Mrs. Caldwell," Howard said quickly. "Miss Flynn will be returning east on tomorrow's stage." "But I can't," Theodora said, desperation creeping into her voice. "I spent everything I had on the fare to come here." Mrs. Caldwell's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, isn't that unfortunate? Perhaps she could work as a laundress, Howard. She certainly has the hands for it. Theodora hid her roughened hands in the folds of her skirt. Years of scrubbing floors and washing linens at the orphanage had left them calloused and red. "I'm sure we can find some arrangement," Howard said dismissively. "For now, you can stay at the boarding house. I'll pay for tonight as a courtesy." Before Theodora could respond, the bell jingled again. This time, a tall man entered, his broad shoulders nearly filling the doorframe. Dust covered his clothes, and the spurs on his boots clinked softly as he walked. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but Theodora could see he was unshaven, his jaw strong and set. "Quaid," Howard greeted him with obvious relief at the interruption. "Your order came in. Let me get it from the back." The newcomer nodded, his eyes briefly meeting Theodora's before he looked away. She noticed they were a startling shade of blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Samuel," Mrs. Caldwell purred, moving closer to the cowboy. "I didn't know you were coming to town today. Will you be attending the social tonight at the Founders Hall?" "Hadn't planned on it, madam," he replied, his voice deep and touched with a Western drawl. "Oh, but you must," Mrs. Caldwell insisted. "Everyone will be there. Even Howard's mail-order bride might attend, though I'm not sure she'll find much welcome." She cast a sidelong glance at Theodora, who felt the sting of the words like a physical blow. Howard returned with a package wrapped in brown paper. "Here you are, Quaid. Everything you ordered." "Much obliged." The cowboy handed over some coins, then turned to leave, tipping his hat slightly to the ladies. Theodora watched him go, wondering what it would be like to have somewhere to belong in this harsh new world. "Now, about your situation," Howard said, turning back to her. "The boarding house is 2 buildings down. Tell Mrs. Winters I sent you." "And what about tomorrow? And the days after?" Theodora asked, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "That's hardly my concern," Howard replied. "Good day, Miss Flynn." Dismissed, Theodora stepped back into the late afternoon sunlight, blinking back tears of humiliation and uncertainty. She had no home to return to, no money, and no prospects. The orphanage wouldn't take her back at her age, and she knew no one else in Boston. The boarding house turned out to be a tidy 2-story building with a small sign in the window. Mrs. Winters, a thin woman with sharp eyes, took Howard's note with a sniff of disapproval. "1 night only," she emphasized, showing Theodora to a small room at the end of the hall. "And I expect you out by 9 tomorrow." "Thank you," Theodora whispered, finally alone with her despair as the door closed behind her. She unpacked her few belongings. 2 dresses besides the one she wore, a nightgown, a hairbrush, a small Bible, and a locket containing a tiny portrait of the mother she barely remembered. With trembling fingers, she opened the locket and gazed at the face so similar to her own plain, some would say, but kind. Her mother had died when Theodora was 5, leaving her to the mercy of distant relatives who quickly deposited her at the orphanage. "What do I do now, Mother?" she whispered to the portrait. After washing her face and hands in the basin provided, Theodora changed into her best dress, a navy blue cotton with slightly less wear at the cuffs, and decided to venture out. Perhaps she could find work in one of the establishments. Even a position as a maid or cook's helper would be better than nothing. The sun was setting as she made her way down the main street, painting the western sky in brilliant streaks of orange and gold. Ahead, she could see people gathering at a large building she assumed was the Founders Hall Mrs. Caldwell had mentioned. Music drifted out each time the doors opened, along with laughter and the murmur of conversation. Theodora hesitated, then straightened her spine. Perhaps someone at the social would know of work available in town. It was worth trying, even if she had to endure more scrutiny and whispers. The hall was decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers, and tables lined the walls laden with food brought by the townspeople. A small group of musicians played in one corner, and several couples were already dancing. Theodora slipped in quietly, trying to remain unnoticed as she surveyed the crowd. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," came Mrs. Caldwell's voice from nearby. She stood with several other well-dressed women, all of whom turned to stare at Theodora. Howard's mistake from back east. Theodora felt her face flame but kept her expression composed. "Good evening, Mrs. Caldwell. Where is Howard, anyway?" one of the other women asked. "Shouldn't he be introducing his bride to everyone?" "Oh, that arrangement has been cancelled," Mrs. Caldwell said with false sympathy. Apparently, the goods didn't match the advertisement. The women tittered, making no attempt to lower their voices. Theodora stood frozen, mortification washing over her in waves. "I heard she's penniless," another woman stage whispered. "Can't even afford to go back where she came from. Such a plain little thing, too," Mrs. Caldwell added. "No wonder she had to resort to becoming a mail-order bride. No man back east would have her." Theodora wanted to flee, but her feet seemed rooted to the floor. If she left now, she'd only confirm their cruel assessment. Instead, she lifted her chin and walked toward the refreshment table, pretending she hadn't heard a word. Howard Pemberton was there, deep in conversation with several men. When he saw her, his expression darkened. "Miss Flynn," he acknowledged stiffly. "I didn't expect to see you here. I thought perhaps I might meet someone who knows of work available in town," Theodora replied, keeping her voice steady despite the knot in her throat. "Work? What sort of work could you possibly do?" Howard scoffed. "This is a frontier town, not a charity house for Eastern spinsters." The men around him chuckled, and Theodora felt as though the floor might open beneath her. She turned away, blinking rapidly to hold back tears, only to find herself face to face with Mrs. Caldwell again. "You really should leave, dear," the woman said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You're making everyone uncomfortable. No one wants to dance with the plain, rejected mail-order bride." A silence fell over that section of the room, and Theodora became painfully aware that many eyes were now fixed on her. The music seemed to fade into the background as shame engulfed her. "I believe the lady promised me this dance." The deep voice came from behind her, and Theodora turned to find the cowboy from the mercantile Samuel Quaid. Mrs. Caldwell had called him standing there, hat in hand. I don't," Theodora stammered, certain he was mocking her as well. But his blue eyes held no mockery, only a quiet determination as he extended his hand. "Miss Flynn, isn't it? May I have this dance?" Before she could respond, he took her hand gently in his calloused one and led her toward the dance floor. The musicians had begun a waltz, and without preamble, Samuel placed his other hand at her waist and guided her into the steps. "You don't have to do this," Theodora whispered, acutely aware of the stares following them. "They'll only mock you too." "Let them try," he replied, his voice low but firm. His blue eyes met hers steadily. "I've never much cared for what Vivian Caldwell or her kind think." Despite her embarrassment, Theodora felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Quaid." "Samuel," he corrected. "Or Sam, if you prefer." As they moved across the floor, Theodora gradually became aware that Samuel was an excellent dancer, guiding her with confident steps that made her own hesitant movements seem almost graceful. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked, surprised. A brief smile crossed his face, softening the rugged lines. "My mother insisted all her sons learn. Said a man should know how to properly escort a lady." "She was right," Theodora said, finding herself relaxing slightly in his capable hands. When the waltz ended, Samuel didn't release her. Instead, He kept her hand in his as the musicians began another tune, this one livelier. "I don't know this dance," Theodora admitted. "I'll teach you," he replied simply, and proceeded to do just that. One dance became two, then three, and with each passing song, Theodora felt lighter, as though the shame and uncertainty that had weighed her down since arriving in Whispering Creek were gradually lifting. Samuel was patient, his guidance unobtrusive but steady, and she found herself laughing when she missed a step instead of cringing in embarrassment. During a brief pause while the musicians refreshed themselves, Samuel led her to the refreshment table and brought her a cup of punch. "I don't understand," Theodora said, taking a sip. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Samuel considered her for a moment before answering. "I know what it's like to be judged unfairly. When I first came to this territory, I was just a boy from Texas with dirt on my boots and nothing to my name. Folks like the Caldwells and Pembertons looked right through me. And now?" she asked. "Now I own the largest cattle ranch in the county," he said without pride, simply stating a fact. "But they still see what they want to see. Which is just a rough cowboy who doesn't belong in their fine society." He shrugged. "Doesn't matter much to me." Theodora studied him, seeing beyond the dusty clothes and unshaven jaw to the intelligence in his eyes and the quiet dignity in his bearing. "I think they're wrong about you, Samuel Quaid. Just as they're wrong about you, Theodora Flynn," he replied, his gaze direct. Before she could respond, the music started again, and Samuel held out his hand. "Shall we continue?" Throughout the evening, they danced every dance together. Theodora became aware of the whispers and stares, but under Samuel's steady gaze, she found she cared less and less. When Mrs. Caldwell attempted to cut in, suggesting that Samuel should spread his attentions more fairly, he politely but firmly declined. "I'm quite content with my current partner, madam," he said, and Theodora couldn't help but notice the flash of displeasure that crossed the elegant woman's face. As the night wore on, the hall grew warmer, and Samuel suggested they step outside for some air. The spring night was cool and clear, with stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. They walked in companionable silence to a small garden behind the hall, where a bench sat beneath a gnarled oak tree. "Thank you for this evening," Theodora said softly as they sat. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't intervened." "You'd have managed," Samuel replied. "There's a strength in you, Miss Flynn. I saw it the moment you stood up to Pemberton in the store." "You heard that?" Theodora asked, embarrassed. "Enough to know he's a fool." Samuel's voice held a note of anger. "A man who judges a woman's worth by her appearance isn't much of a man at all." Theodora looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. "What am I going to do, Samuel? I have nowhere to go, no money, and no prospects." "What can you do?" he asked. "Besides dance beautifully, that is." She smiled faintly at the compliment. "I can cook, clean so. I taught the younger children at the orphanage their letters and numbers. Nothing special, I'm afraid." "Sounds plenty special to me," Samuel said. "My ranch needs a teacher." Theodora looked up in surprise. "A teacher?" Samuel nodded. "There are 5 families working for me with 11 children between them. Nearest school is in town, too far for daily travel. I've been meaning to hire someone to teach them. You would offer me a position? Just like that?" Theodora couldn't keep the suspicion from her voice. She'd learned early that unexpected kindness often came with hidden costs. "The position comes with room and board in the main house," Samuel continued, as if he hadn't heard her question. "It's not fancy, but it's clean and comfortable, and I pay fair wages." "Why would you do this for me?" Theodora pressed. "You don't know me." Samuel was quiet for a moment, looking out at the stars. "When I came to Wyoming, I was 19 and had nothing but the horse I rode in on. An old rancher named Miller gave me a chance when no one else would. Said he saw something in me worth betting on. He turned to face her, his expression serious. I see something in you worth betting on, Theodora Flynn. The simplicity and sincerity in his words brought tears to her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it, he replied. The ranch is called Broken Wheel. It's about 10 miles east of town. Take the night to think it over. Inside, the music had stopped, and people were beginning to leave the hall. Samuel walked Theodora back to the boarding house in comfortable silence, the night air cool against their skin. At the door, he removed his hat. Whatever you decide, Miss Flynn, it was my honor to dance with you tonight. Theodora, she corrected softly, or Thea if you prefer. A smile touched his lips. Thea, then. Good night. Good night, Samuel, she replied, watching as he turned and walked away. His tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. In her small room, Theodora lay awake long into the night, her mind racing with possibilities. By morning, she had made her decision. The journey to Broken Wheel Ranch took most of the morning. Samuel had sent a wagon for her, driven by a cheerful Mexican man named Miguel who worked as the ranch's foreman. As they traveled east from Whispering Creek, the landscape opened up into rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, the distant mountains a purple smudge on the horizon. Mr. Quaid built this place from nothing, Miguel told her proudly as they crested a hill and Theodora got her first glimpse of the ranch. 10 years ago, this was just empty land. Now, it's the finest cattle operation in 3 counties. Broken Wheel Ranch was larger than Theodora had imagined. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure built of timber and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Nearby stood a bunkhouse, stables, barn, and several smaller cabins scattered around the property where the ranch hands and their families lived. Samuel was waiting on the porch as the wagon pulled up, his hat in his hands. He looked different in the daylight, younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with his dark hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaven. Welcome to Broken Wheel, he said, helping her down from the wagon. It's beautiful, Theodora replied honestly, taking in the vista of grasslands and distant mountains. It's home, Samuel said simply. Come inside, Mrs. Ramirez has prepared lunch, and then I can show you where you'll be teaching. The interior of the house was surprisingly refined, with polished wooden floors, comfortable furniture, and bookshelves lining the walls of what appeared to be a study. Mrs. Ramirez, Miguel's wife, served a delicious meal of beef stew and fresh bread, during which Samuel explained more about the children she would be teaching and their varying levels of education. The schoolroom is in what used to be the old bunkhouse, he told her as they walked across the yard afterward. I had it fixed up last year, but haven't found the right teacher until now. The schoolroom was simple but well equipped, with a large blackboard, several rows of desks, and a stove for heat in the winter. Shelves held books, slates, and other supplies. This is wonderful, Theodora said, running her fingers along the teacher's desk at the front of the room. When would you like me to start? Monday, Samuel replied. That gives you the weekend to settle in and prepare. The children are excited to meet you. The days passed quickly as Theodora settled into life at Broken Wheel Ranch. Her room in the main house was larger and more comfortable than any she'd had before, with a window that looked out over the eastern pastures where the cattle grazed. Mrs. Ramirez took her under her wing, showing her around the property and introducing her to the families whose children she would teach. School began the following Monday with 11 students ranging in age from 6 to 15. Theodora quickly discovered that teaching on a ranch was vastly different from teaching at the orphanage. These children came with practical knowledge of animal husbandry, weather patterns, and survival skills that most Eastern children would never learn. She adapted her lessons accordingly, incorporating their existing knowledge into her teaching. In the evenings, she often sat with Samuel on the porch, discussing the day's events and watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. She learned that he had come to Wyoming after the Civil War, had left his family's small Texas ranch in ruins. With nothing to keep him there, he had headed north, working as a hired hand until he saved enough to stake a claim on what would become Broken Wheel. "Why Broken Wheel?" she asked one evening as they shared coffee after dinner. Samuel smiled ruefully. "My wagon broke an axle the day I arrived. Seemed like a sign." As spring turned to summer, Theodora found herself watching for Samuel whenever he rode out with the men. There was something about the way he sat his horse, confident and at ease, that drew her eye. And when he returned, dusty and tired, his face would light up at the sight of her waiting on the porch. She told herself it was merely gratitude. She felt appreciation for the man who had rescued her from an impossible situation. But as the weeks passed, she knew it was more than that. Samuel Quaid had seen value in her when others saw only plainness, had offered respect when others offered mockery. One warm July evening, Samuel invited her to ride with him to a spot he wanted to show her. They set out as the sun began its descent, Theodora on a gentle mare named Daisy that Samuel had taught her to ride. "Where are we going?" she asked as they crested a hill and followed a narrow trail through a stand of cottonwoods. "You'll see," Samuel replied with a smile that made her heart skip. The trail opened onto a small meadow beside a clear stream. Wildflowers dotted the grass, and the late afternoon sun cast everything in a golden glow. Samuel dismounted and helped Theodora from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "It's beautiful," she said, taking in the peaceful scene. "This is my favorite place on the ranch," Samuel told her, leading her to a flat rock beside the stream. "I come here to think." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the water burble over stones and watching swallows dart above the surface. Theodora was acutely aware of Samuel beside her, of the warmth of his arm almost touching hers. "Thea," he said finally, turning to face her, "there's something I need to tell you." Her heart quickened at the serious note in his voice. "What is it?" "When I offered you the teaching position, it wasn't entirely out of charity or because I needed a teacher," he admitted, though both those things were true. "I don't understand," Theodora said, though a small hope was beginning to bloom in her chest. "From the moment I saw you in Pemberton's store, standing there with your chin up despite his cruelty, I knew you were someone special," Samuel said, his blue eyes earnest. "And when I held you in my arms that night, dancing, I knew I never wanted to let you go." Theodora's breath caught in her throat. "Samuel." "I'm not a man of fancy words, Thea," he continued, taking her hands in his. "But I've come to care for you deeply. More than care, I love you. Your kindness, your strength, the way you've brought life and learning to this ranch. I love everything about you." Tears filled Theodora's eyes as joy washed through her. "I love you too, Samuel. I think I have since that first dance." His smile was radiant as he reached up to cup her cheek. "I never thought I'd find someone like you. Someone who sees the man beneath the dust and calluses. And I never thought I'd find someone who sees beyond my plain face to who I really am," Theodora whispered. "There's nothing plain about you, Thea Flynn," Samuel said fiercely. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever known, inside and out." Then he was kissing her, his lips gentle against hers, and Theodora felt as though she had finally found her home. They were married in September, with the ranch hands and their families as witnesses. Theodora wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Samuel had ordered from Denver, and wildflowers in her hair. As they exchanged vows beneath the cottonwoods by the stream, Theodora thought of how far she had come from that first humiliating day in Whispering Creek. Word of their marriage reached town, of course. When they rode in together the following week to purchase supplies, they encountered Howard Pemberton outside his store. He stared in disbelief at Theodora, elegantly dressed as befitted the wife of the county's most successful rancher, her arm linked with Samuel's. "Mrs. Quaid," he acknowledged stiffly. "You're looking well." "Thank you, Mr. Pemberton," Theodora replied with a serene smile. "I am very well indeed." As they walked away, Samuel squeezed her hand. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. Theodora looked up at her husband, at the love shining in his blue eyes, and shook her head. "Not a single one." Later that day, they attended a social at the Founders Hall, the same hall where they had danced together all those months ago. This time, when they entered, heads turned not in mockery but in respect and, from some, envy. Mrs. Caldwell approached, her smile tight. "Mr. and Mrs. Quaid, how lovely to see you both." "Mrs. Caldwell," Samuel acknowledged with a polite nod. "You must be so pleased with how things turned out, Mrs. Quaid," the woman said to Theodora, her voice honeyed but her eyes cold. "Such a fortunate twist of fate for you." "Indeed," Theodora replied calmly, "though I've found that fate rarely hands us anything we haven't earned in some way." She smiled up at Samuel. "I'm grateful every day for the man who saw my worth when others couldn't." As the music began, Samuel led her onto the dance floor, just as he had that first night. But this time, as they moved together in perfect harmony, Theodora felt no fear, no shame, only joy and belonging. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Quaid?" Samuel asked formally, his eyes twinkling. "You may have every dance, Mr. Quaid," Theodora replied, "for the rest of our lives." And as the music played on, Samuel Quaid held his wife close and danced with her until the stars came out, just as he had promised he always would on the night they first met. The night a plain mail-order bride and a kind-hearted cowboy found in each other everything they had never dared to hope for.